This video is brought to you by John Robson Guitar Tuition. If you enjoy the content, please consider supporting the channel by enrolling on a course, purchasing some guitar lessons or a t-shirt, or you can join my Patreon. Now, on with the show. Hello chaps, welcome once again to John Robson Guitar Tuition. As always, I do hope you're well. Okay, it's Top 5 Tuesday, and recent episodes of this little slot have been concerned with my favourite albums from various decades. We've done the 70s, we've done the 80s, and big surprise today we're doing the 90s. Now the thing about the 90s is that there was a lot of guitar-orientated music around in the 90s, but much of it kind of passed me by, if I'm honest. That's largely because I started the 1990s in my mid-20s and finished the decade in my mid-30s. So I was on that sort of downhill slope to early middle age, if you like. Basically, I was at that period of my life when that we all go through, I'm sure, where your musical tastes have pretty much become defined. And, every new genre that comes along, or every new artist that comes along and is heralded as being groundbreaking in some way, you're thinking, yeah, but this is just a reinvention of this genre or that genre that I lived through the first time. So it tends to have less of an impact on you. The 1990s for me were largely a decade where I was in continuity mode, where I was enjoying the new output by largely enjoying the output by established bands that had been around for a while. So that is very definitely reflected in this list. So let's get cracking straight away with
Ar Via Musicom by Eric Johnson.
Yeah, what an album. Ar Via Musicom, Eric Johnson. It's just, for me, a perfect guitar album. There is melodic, instrumental rock shredding on there in the form of Cliffs of Dover, for example. Absolutely barnstorming, chicken-picking country in Steve's Boogie. Fantastic, kind of fingerstyle blues in, I think that's Song for George. East Wes is like has more of a jazzy flavour, and it's just so beautifully produced. Eric's playing this was the first I'd heard of Eric Johnson, so this isn't one of the continuity bands I was talking about. This was the first time I'd heard Eric, and like many of the albums that I discovered and got into in pre-internet days, you read about it in music magazines, guitar magazines, and you go out and you take a chance on it, and there's that I've spoken about this before, that bus ride home where you're reading the sleeve notes and, trying to imagine what this music is going to be like before you finally get it home. So, yeah, I mean, there've been a few albums that have disappointed me like that, but this one most certainly didn't. I've linked to all these albums down in the description, so if you don't know Ar Via Musicom by Eric Johnson, then you should definitely check it out. It sounds as fresh and as relevant today as it did when it came out in, February 1990. It's just a masterpiece of a guitar album. And he's got a pretty good singing voice as well on a lot of the tracks. So that's why that one's on this list. Next.
Still Got the Blues by Gary Moore.
Yes, there had to be a Gary album on the list. The 1990s was very much Gary's blues period, or his first blues period, because he did kind of veer away from it a little bit with albums like Dark Days in Paradise and A Different Beat, and then the whole Scars thing. But then he came back to the blues eventually in his latter years. I first heard Gary playing blues on a live VHS, but not as part of a live concert. It was basically I think the Emerald Isles VHS. Which was sort of the Victims of the Future kind of period of his rock career in the 80s. And basically he's doing a tour of Ireland, and there's some backstage shots in the dressing room where he and Phil Lynott are jamming some blues. And I thought, he should really do an album full of this stuff. And lo and behold, about 5-6 years later, Still Got the Blues came out in March 1990. So these first two are just scraping in under the wire for the 90s. But I'm sure you know all about this album. It's just a fantastic album. Gary doing what was in his heart, really. He was getting a little bit bored with the sort of 80s, kind of power rock kind of stuff. The last album before this, I think, was After the War. And, he in interviews was saying that was starting to sound a little bit like back out in the fields and that sort of stuff. And he felt like he was just retreading old ground. So I believe he self-financed the Still Got the Blues album. I don't think he had much record company support, but obviously it took off and pretty much reinvigorated and redefined his career. And his playing on this album is just off the scale. He's jamming with his heroes like Albert King and Albert Collins, and George Harrison makes an appearance. He's playing on a couple of tracks, I believe, the Greenie Les Paul. And it's just a fantastic album. Melodic, shreddy, blues rock guitar playing at its best. And that's why this one's on the list. Next.
The Division Bell by Pink Floyd.
Yes, now this is for me the post Roger Waters Pink Floyd album that proved Pink Floyd could exist without Roger Waters. I was never a big fan of A Momentary Lapse of Reason. To me, that just sounded very much like a David Gilmour solo album. Nothing wrong with that, but it didn't really sound like a Pink Floyd album. Roger Waters described A Momentary Lapse of Reason as being a perfectly executed forgery. And much as it pains me to say it, but, I kind of agree with him on that. It's not a bad album, it just doesn't have that Pink Floyd aura to it, where the Division Bell does. It sounds like a proper classic Floyd album. Starting with the opening, that kind of slow fade in on Cluster 1, and so many great tracks, Coming Back to Life, What Do You Want From Me, Lost for Words. It's just a fantastic album all the way through. And, for me, it sounds as good as The Wall, or Dark Side of the Moon, or, Wish You Were Here. It's up there with having that Pink Floyd magic to it that A Momentary Lapse of Reason didn't have. And I have to say, that collection of outtakes and half-finished ideas, Endless River, that's an album I really, really tried to like. But in my opinion, Pink Floyd, after Roger Waters left, only released one proper Pink Floyd album, and it's The Division Bell, and that's why this one's on the list. Next.
From the Cradle by Eric Clapton.
Yeah, now, Eric Clapton, he has his critics, and occasionally I am amongst them. When he's got the fire in his belly and the bit between his teeth, there are, few blues players better than Eric, I think. He always seems to get that fire in his belly and get the bit between his teeth when he's working on some kind of blues-based project. You go back to, I think it was 1989, wasn't it, the Journeyman album, where there was a lot of blues on that album, and he's jamming with Robert Cray on Before You Accuse Me, and there's, Bad Love comes from that album. That's when you can start to think, okay, Eric, yeah, we've left albums like August and Behind the Sun, which were not great albums. We've left that kind of territory behind us, and now we're getting back into a more blues-based vein. And I mean, the version of Hard Times, the old Ray Charles song from that album, Journeyman, is a really good reading of the song. But From the Cradle, this is where he thinks, okay, I'm going to make a full-on, full-fat, no holds barred blues album, and it's recorded largely live. I believe there's a couple of overdubs, like minor overdubs, so you can't say it's a completely everybody in the same room recording live. 100%, but it's like 99.9% done that way. And I often talk about this, there's those moments when you're listening to a song or an album where you can almost feel the eye contact between the musicians in the room, the players on the session, and they're just getting into the groove and enjoying it, having fun, and realising that collectively they are creating something rather special. Eric definitely has, as I say, the fire in his belly and the bit between his teeth on this album. I think it's up there with like his greatest blues recordings, perhaps not quite reaching the lofty heights of the Layla and Other Assorted Love Songs album. For me, that is a high watermark of Eric's blues playing. But I think it's certainly up there with the Beano album, and that's, not a bad height to be reaching, really, is it? And yeah, 1995's, I believe it was, or was it 95 or 94, September 94 it came out, the From the Cradle album. If you are not familiar with that album, then I really recommend going and checking it out. It's Eric playing blues and doing what he loves and doing it well. So that's why it's on the list. Next.
Definitely Maybe by Oasis.
Yes, the one album that was like part of the guitar zeitgeist of the 90s, the one that was part of that latest sort of flavour of the month thing. That, as I said, a lot of that sort of stuff passed me by. I love this album. I think it's one of the great debut albums that any band has ever released. And track 1, side 1, Rock and Roll Star, it's a fantastic, just raunchy bit of classic rock. You can call it kind of Brit rock or Brit pop or, kind of 90s, rock or whatever. For me, it's just a rock band that have come up the hard way, not manufactured. They played gigs and they paid their dues and, learned their craft, and it shows on this album. I think it was Alan McGee, wasn't it, from Creation Records, when he signed them, he described them as the perfect blend of the Sex Pistols and the Beatles, and you can kind of hear that. You've got Liam's snarling, sort of Johnny Rotten-esque vocals, and, Noel Noel is a man who knows how to put a chord sequence together, it has to be said, and play simple but effective, memorable guitar lines over the top of a nicely written chord sequence. And it's unlike the whole sort of Seattle grunge kind of thing, which I've got to admit largely passed me by, much of which was, infused with, kind of a dark mood. That it was a very sort of, I always found grunge was a very pessimistic genre of music. This album is just bursting with enthusiasm and optimism, and it's one of those albums that whenever I listen to it, I can't help but have a big grin on my face by the end of it. It's just fantastic. It proves that, every generation of, young artists and musicians that come along will always gravitate towards big raunchy, or there'll be a certain contingent that will always gravitate towards big raunchy rock and roll guitar riffs, and that's no bad thing, and that's why it's on the list. So there you go. Those are the albums that made a big impression on me in the 1990s. Let me know, as always, which guitar-based albums from the 90s resonate with you to this day. I've picked these 5 because these are the ones that sort of I heard in the 90s, made a big impression on me back then, and have stayed with me. So they've stood the test of time. So let me know which ones have stood the test of time with you. And that is pretty much it for today, folks. Hope you found the video entertaining and, amusing in some way. And if you have, please hit the subscribe button and the notification bell if you haven't already done so. And why not give me a like while you're at it? Don't forget the live stream, Friday, 5 PM UK time, where we drink beer and talk about music and guitars. What a great way to kick off the weekend. I would love to see you there if you can make it. But for now, I'll bid you all a good day and say thank you so much for watching. Thank you for your time. Look after yourselves, folks. Stay well, stay safe, and above all, stay sane. Bye for now.